Has Mike Israetel been lying about his knowledge and PhD in order to seem more credible on YouTube? And is his entire reputation about to go down the drain? A YouTuber called Solomon Nelson recently posted this over 1 hour long video going over Mike Israetel's PhD, claiming that it's so bad that it shouldn't even have passed the entry level for what is considered a PhD thesis. Not only does this paper have a lot of errors, but it's actually one of the worst written papers I've ever read. So, does this mean Dr. Mike is a fraud, and could his PhD title be revoked because of the backlash from this specific video? Well, let's see. So the video is over 1 hour long and you can easily find it on YouTube. Solomon starts by going over some clips where Dr. Mike uses his PhD title to seem more credible, which he's done a lot. Heck, just hearing the word doctor already makes somebody's claims more appealing, because in theory, having a PhD or doctor title in any field means you are the upper elite of knowledge of what you're talking about, with a few exceptions. But nonetheless, it is a very strong title that reeks of credibility, which is also why the incentive to get one for many people is so strong. As somebody who has studied exercise science just like Mike has, I am currently eligible for a PhD myself, which is why I think I'm competent enough to actually analyze this topic. Solomon then goes on to cover what actually goes into a PhD, like what the criteria for an approved thesis are, and he briefly skims through Mike's thesis, which, mind you, is about the interrelationships of fitness characteristics in Division I athletes from 4 different sports. Basically, he just looks at the relationship between body fat, muscle strength, jumping ability, acceleration, etc., and how they relate to performance in that sport. But one thing to keep in mind here is that most of these relationships are already well documented, and the PhD just becomes very generalized while not adding anything to the field in terms of new information or viewpoints. The paper basically concludes that yes, being strong, agile while having a lot of muscle and low body fat does actually boost performance, which is widely accepted already and has been for years. Though, mind you, this thesis was published in 2013, where it might not have been as documented, but Mike even says so himself throughout the thesis that this is well documented, that these things produce better athletes.
He repeats this theme in chapter 4, when he affirms that his results concord with much of the other research on the relationships between power, body composition, and athletic performance.
So he basically used his own study with 80 participants just to confirm something we already know, and while that might sound pretty weird to a lot of you, it is actually fairly common across all fields of science, because it strengthens the claim if it's more replicable. Like, if one study shows one thing, then that's not good enough grounds to believe it, but if 50 studies show it, then the evidence becomes stronger. But that is also the difference between a PhD and something like a master's thesis or a regular published paper, that it's supposed to uphold a higher standard and is supposed to at least try to bring in some new knowledge or at least theories on a topic. Solomon claims that the basis for the PhD thesis is also way too small, since usually you would have to find a gap in research and fill it with something more meaningful.
Mike's thesis proposes no new theories, investigates no novel mechanisms nor methods, and makes no methodological innovations. It's a largely descriptive work that fails to advance the conceptual boundaries of sports science in any meaningful way.
Like, oh, we know muscle strength improves athletic performance, but we haven't looked at relative strength specifically, or we haven't looked at what effort values these athletes train at, or whatever. But Mike's thesis bases itself on the statement that we already know all of these things, how much they matter and how they matter, but we haven't looked at all of them together in a larger collective group of Division I athletes.
Merely noting the absence of data isn't on its own a meaningful justification for research.
You can't just take a new group of people to make a study unless you have a compelling reason. Like, you think something would change, perhaps the previous knowledge we have don't necessarily apply or transfer well to that specific group. And Solomon even critiqued Mike for often citing the same work of one of his friends and colleagues without being so critical of it. But okay, I don't think Mike's thesis is bad or anything on the basis of that alone. But this goes a lot deeper as well. For one, Mike's thesis is full of grammatical and statistical errors.
Properties as propertites, neural as neural, training as traininige.
On top of that, some of these mistakes are even found in his data tables, which, mind you, should be the cleanest part of the entire thesis, since it's just numbers, right? Like you can see here, his descriptive data shows that this group of 20 people had an average weight of 73.9 kilos and a height of 174.9 centimeters. Looks decent enough until... what the hell is that? If you don't know what this means, I don't blame you, but this is what we call a standard deviation, which just tells you how spread out the numbers are from the average. And if the number is small, people are more similar, and if it's big, people are more different. And it goes both ways. If 10 people weigh an average of 80 kilos but the standard deviation is 10, then most people weigh between 70 and 90 kilos. But in Mike's case, that deviation on weight here is 71.8, which means there were people who weighed less than 2 kilos in this group. That is statistically impossible and realistically super impossible unless you're Jack's fit, and an error like this is found within a PhD in a table which Mike refers to many times in his own thesis. And it doesn't happen just once, but on 3 separate occasions across a full dataset. And we also see it on height, weight, body fat, and even age. This is a super lowball error for anyone who's ever studied statistics. It's like if your math professor confused 2 plus 2 for 2 minus 2 and doesn't correct himself after. The age one is probably the worst though, because an average age of 20 with a standard deviation of 21.2 means that the youngest participants had a negative age, like they're minus 1 year old. So basically a lot of the data Mike uses here isn't even real data and shouldn't be cleared in a PhD. And yes, stuff like this does happen from time to time, and I've even read published articles on PubMed with statistical errors similar to this. Heck, I've also done it myself, but to this degree on something as basic as descriptive statistics is very odd for a PhD and shows weak supervision. And even though this is a big problem in many fields of science, Mike also suffers from sesquipedalianism, or big word syndrome, which means he tends to use fancy phrasings in order to sound more knowledgeable, even though it sometimes messes things up in his thesis. And this is actually very common in any field of science and has been looked down upon by other scientists because it often takes away from the knowledge they're trying to showcase and just makes articles unreadable, even for people with an academic background. Though I guess this isn't alone something which would pull down the quality of his thesis, it just doesn't make the information any more presentable. And even smaller grammatical errors, poor citations, and just a lot of messed up sentences doesn't just show that his thesis wasn't sufficiently examined by Mike or his supervisor, but that even the examiners overlooked a lot of these things, and maybe didn't do their job properly. And it's not hard to go over and make some of these changes either. It seems like it was submitted with just 2 minutes to spare. It seems rushed. And Solomon goes on about way more stuff than I just mentioned, but so what? Does this mean Mike has been scamming his audience for years with a PhD title which he might not have deserved? No, not really. It means that his PhD thesis was very flawed and probably should have gone through a solid rewrite, or that it shouldn't have been approved at all, which there is a strong argument for. But what if I told you that the version Solomon reviewed wasn't actually the published thesis? Yes, the one I and Solomon read, which was available on the university's website, wasn't actually the final draft, but rather a pre-draft, which would later undergo over 1,600 corrections. And it was only after Dr. Milo Wolf published the full article that I was actually able to read the complete version, which mind you still has a lot of those same errors, but is a lot more polished than the version Solomon reviewed, and certainly is a lot more presentable. In any sense, I am glad I chose not to publish this video prematurely because it might have left the wrong impression. Unfortunately, at least to my knowledge, there wasn't any version like this Mike had available anywhere on the internet. So it's not like Solomon is at fault for doing this, but considering how long he spent going through the thesis, which mind you is over 200 pages long, asking Dr. Mike directly would have also been a smart thing to do. Now, will we see a lot of people making videos about this? Probably yes. Will we have people who think that Mike's version is somehow a fake? Definitely. But I think it's fair to say that the draft, which over 1 million people have seen to be criticized by now, wasn't eligible for criticism after all. I will also leave the full and revised version of the paper in my own video description for those of you who have the time and willpower to read through it. And I recommend watching Dr. Milo Wolf's rebuttal as well to get a better understanding of both sides to the argument about whether or not Mike's PhD and his topic was sufficiently original and necessary. At this point, this discussion is just about to fall apart, because most follow-up critiques of Solomon's video probably didn't even read the unfinished paper, and I know for a fact none of them read the finished one because it wasn't available anywhere. All I know is that Craig Doucette just gained 2 months worth of content.
Before you watch this freaking video, like it! Like the button right now!
Let me know what you think down below in the comments about this whole mess, and I will see you all next time.